Why don't you introduce yourself for us?
My name is Erin Olszewski. I'm from Tampa, Florida. I'm a registered nurse. I am an Army combat veteran. I served in Iraq 2003 to 2004. I am a mother of 3 small boys, and I guess I'm best known as the New York City nurse whistleblower.
Very few countries in the world lost more people to coronavirus than New York did, and no states lost more in the United States. How exactly did that happen? It's a question that needs a serious answer. Many people died. Finding out seems of no interest whatsoever to the press. They'd rather shame people for visiting the beach. Erin Marie Olszewski is a nurse. She spent almost a month working in New York's Elmhurst Hospital. That was the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in the state. She was so shocked by what she saw that she began to collect undercover footage of what was happening around her.
I remember the news came on and they were talking about this coronavirus. And this was February, and I'm like, watch, this is going to be something. So I kept my eye on it. You know, anytime they introduce a new virus, there's going to be problems, you know, and especially just being in the nursing field, you know, and working in the hospital, what can I expect? And then come March, you know, we're locked down, which never made sense. They locked us down to keep the hospitals, you know, able to, you know, function for the influx of COVID patients, which at my hospital here never came. There were no influx of patients. There was no wave. They were actually furloughing nurses. At that point, I was already having red flags because it didn't make sense to lock people down if we weren't busy. And what it was doing is actually causing more illnesses and death by locking people that actually needed treatment in their homes. You know, they weren't coming to the hospitals, and they were dying at home, you know, and becoming really, really ill. They were afraid. Everybody was really afraid. What they kept doing is just pushing back the wave. The wave will come. You know, and at this point, all eyes are on New York. You know, what's going on in New York?
2 hours, the Javits Center will complete its transition from a convention center into a makeshift hospital. It is one of many opening as the healthcare system prepares for this next surge of patients.
Gus, a field hospital inside of Central Park, something neighbors told me tonight they never thought they would see. But take a look behind me here. Here we are. The tents have gone up next to a children's playground inside Central Park, and come Tuesday, they will be occupied with COVID patients, surrounded by doctors and nurses working in the elements to save lives.
After a while, I decided that I wanted to travel to New York. So I'm like, you know, if they need help, then I'll go. I'm not, you know, I've been to war. You know, it can't be much worse, you know, and kissed my kids goodbye, got a ticket, and I was on my way to New York. Clueless, I didn't know what to expect, just like anyone else. I landed, airport's empty, took an Uber to the hotel that they put us up. I was specifically at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. I'm expecting, like, let's go. You know, this is war, right? It was the front lines, this is the war zone. Sat around 3 days, talked to other nurses that were there. Some of them were sitting around for 21 days, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And this was early April, at the height of the pandemic. You're seeing all over the news that there's not enough supplies, there's not enough nurses. There was enough people and enough supplies, but they weren't utilizing them. So that was kind of my first red flag. Like, if this is a war zone, you know, when you drop into a war zone, you get to work. You fight the war. It was ultimately kind of a lottery, and they picked me by chance to go to Elmhurst Hospital, which happened to be the epicenter of the epicenter. So it's the one that everybody saw all over the news. You saw all the bodies in the freezer trucks, and I'm like, it's my luck, you know, like, I'm just unlucky. So we took buses. All the nurses went to their specific hospitals, and they took me over to Queens, the epicenter of the epicenter. So that's where this story, you know, kind of begins.
The Elmhurst Hospital in Queens is right now the epicenter within the epicenter.
Elmhurst Hospital is the epicenter of the epicenter.
And Elmhurst Hospital is really at the center of this crisis here in the city and in the country, with doctors desperately trying to keep up with the growing number of patients as supplies dwindle.
And you see the black body bags. You say, what's in there? It's Elmhurst Hospital. Must be supplies. It's not supplies, it's people.
My first real shift is when I really realized that the reason that people were dying, it was not because of COVID. It was because of the treatment that they were getting, or the lack of treatment. It was negligence. It was a whole lot of people that kind of gave up on these patients. It was a very eerie, very sad, sombering walk through these halls. And then my first shift, I realized that these patients weren't actually even being treated. You know, they weren't being given medications to actually help them. They were being sedated, you know, they were being paralyzed in order to keep them on ventilators. Nobody cared. You know, there was a couple patients that I went into their rooms, you know, to assess, and, you know, they had feces at their backs for at least 2-3 weeks. You know, they were left to die. And I'm not saying every patient, you know, not every doctor, not every nurse, you know, was just neglectful, but it became the norm.
I've been taking care of a patient for like a week right now, and this is my and I called them. And he's been doing great. He had a trach put in and he's been doing great. He's been talking like, or communicating with me. He's telling me, like, laughing at my jokes, and talked to his kids on FaceTime a couple days ago. And I told him that, I told his kids that he was doing fine. And he was. And today I was giving him, and they came in and they told me that I need to leave the room and I have to give report to somebody else. They took me from that unit and they put me in the emergency room, and they don't need me there, but they put me there, and I'm not even there like 20 minutes. I'm not even there 20 minutes and I hear a code being called in my room that I was just left, and it's him. And he was fine. He was fine. I don't understand it. Nothing makes sense. Like, why would they take me out of his room and put me in the ED, and then not 20 minutes later he's dead? It doesn't make sense. Like, did they kill him? He was my one patient that was gonna live. He shouldn't have died. I don't know what they did to him. Something's not right.
I got back to my hotel room and I broke down, like on the floor in tears, like, I can't do this. So I haven't talked about like this part in a long time. I like didn't know what else to do, so I called like my friends. I told them like what was happening. I told them that it was literally gross negligence. Nobody cared. They weren't coding patients that were, you know, a code blue. They would just let them go. And, you know, then reporting to the families like that they did everything they could, when I know that for a fact that they didn't. And when I saw that, that's when I realized like nobody is going to believe this. No one's going to believe that this is happening without proof. And so I contacted a couple New York attorneys, and we decided that I needed to go undercover. So I did.
This patient is in with like a non-COVID. I don't understand why they're doing that.
I know. There's 4 patients in a row here non-COVID. And this is supposed to be the COVID.
Yeah.
Because 7th floor, they shut it down.
That's right. I'm confused.
And then they're going to have non-COVID there.
Yeah.
This is going to be the only COVID, so they shouldn't put any non-COVIDs here.
Well, that's what they've been doing. The guy over in 29, I had him upstairs because I was on CCU before it.
Yeah.
And he came in with a stroke.
I know, that's what 26-1 was, a stroke.
And no COVID, and now he's got COVID, and he's on a vent.
Well, because we gave it to him here.
My attorney dropped off a pair of spy glasses for me. I got audio recording software for my phone, and I started recording.
My bigger problem with this whole scenario is when they intubate people who don't need it.
Yeah.
And it looks very clear to me that they're just pushing it.
It was like the day before intubation, he was fine on the rebreather.
And then they intubated, and then he got a pneumo, and then they put in a PEP tube, and then it's been shipped.
And now he's 37 years old and dead.
This isn't what my profession stands for. We can't look away. We're mandatory reporters. Like, this is our job, to protect the patient. As nurses, we're patient advocates. Our oath is to do no harm, and that's all that was being done. There were very few actual ICU doctors running these floors. They had residents in. There was ophthalmologists, dentists, people that had absolutely no clue what they were doing. Maybe, 2 or 3 respiratory therapists for the entire hospital, when we needed respiratory therapists for the ventilators because nobody knew how to run them, which also caused death. So they would blow out these patients' lungs and then call it a day. Next patient in, same thing.
Nearly 2,000 people have tested positive for coronavirus. That's bad, and this is worse. Hospitals there are getting ready tonight for a surge. Meantime, Governor Ned Lamont toured a facility manufacturing ventilators for critical care patients. 34 people have died, and federal officials just approved a disaster declaration for the state, and that will allow all 8 counties to be reimbursed for costs associated with the response to the pandemic.
Patients coming into the emergency room would be given no options, and they would be told, if you're not admitted, you're going to die, essentially. You need to get admitted. And so they did. Fear is a very, very strong emotion. And when people are unaware of what's going on, obviously they're going to trust us. But nobody was telling the truth.
The Comfort now is just pulling into dock here in Midtown Manhattan.
They could have went to the comfort shed where, if they didn't have COVID, that was meant for them. But it was just bypassed. Governor Cuomo said that they were running out of space and they needed extra hospital beds for the patients that didn't have COVID. And so President Trump at the time sent the ship. And the ship was never utilized because they were ordered to stand down. They admitted everybody to these hospitals. They stuffed them in like sardines because there was financial incentive to do so. It was $13,000 to admit these patients to the hospitals, another $39,000 to put them on a ventilator. And then in some cases, people were worth $10,000 per death, with no liability to any of the hospitals, any of the staff, any of the doctors, any of the nurses. And all at the same time, nurses were getting paid $10,000 a week on average. Doctors were getting paid, $50,000, $60,000 a week, and everybody was on gag orders. And if you said anything, you were fired, which ultimately, happened to me at the end of my time in New York.